Excellent. So what you're going to see is that I've taken it from a slightly different angle and I've focused on some different areas. So let me explain and we'll kick off. So there's actually only going to be a couple of slides, you'll be pleased to hear. So firstly, I'll tell you a bit of the economic stuff that sat around it. So not a technical recession this year, depending how you like to classify these things. Some good news, if you like, on the inflation and debt reduction piece. With inflation now coming down, of course, we all know it's a year-on-year piece, but at least from a headline viewpoint, that is good news for us as businesses in the area. There was talk around help for households. I'll pick that up a little bit, but not too much, because that's the bit that will be mainly on the news later anyway. There was a lot of focus on new and growth technologies, and I'm going to pick up a little bit on that in more detail as we go through. And of course, the bit that had been highlighted a lot was encouraging people back into work. Now, there had been quite a lot in the press around encouraging the over 50s back to work. But actually, what this one did was also pick up a lot on people with disabilities who were trying to get back into the workplace, trying to support that, and also supporting parents with increased childcare provision. And we'll pick up on that in more detail as we go through. And there was also a piece in there supporting local charities. But what I'm mainly going to do is I've actually taken all of that and split it into these 4 categories. So with very much a business focus for what we're doing today, you know, if you want to read about, you know, some of the more domestic stuff, it'll all be on the news later. So we're going to focus very much on the implications for business. So I've actually just split this straight into these 4 categories, and we'll go through these together, but I'm going to reach out to various ones of you here as well at the same time. So that we pick up on people's experience in these areas. So Jan, I'm sure you were all over this one today, but the piece is around corporation tax. So company profits between 50 and 250, as we know, going from around the 19 to 25 group, and the confirmed increase from 19 to 25% for anything over 250,000. But, and I know this is an area you're very strong on, is that companies can deduct investment in new machinery and technology to lower their taxable profits. And there was quite a lot of talk around the creative industries and some of the tax breaks available for them as well. So Jan did an excellent business support hour a few weeks ago, touching on this area around some of the tax breaks that are available in the creative industries and in technology. And Jan, I'm going to put you on the spot. Is there anything you want to add on that piece that people might like to know about?
Not really, only to say that obviously they announced that there was going to be they were going to allow all expenses or certain expenses to be fully expensing, whereas sometimes you can't always have the entire cost to expense against it. But actually it's not particularly helpful for most of the smaller companies still stuck with that corporation tax rate. It doesn't really help people very much. It helps some of the bigger corporations, but ultimately I think companies were hopeful that they were going to do something more with this corporation tax. So it's a bit of a disappointment in terms of what they've actually delivered on that front. Obviously there are some elements of it that will be helpful. In terms of the creative industries, it is you know, quite a significant sort of shuffle on that. They're changing the tax rate to 34%, and it was 25%. But that said, as always with these things, it's all a bit of a dark art. And it's not actually 34%, it's 34% of another percent, which actually means by the time we've done all of that, it's 25.5%. So it's a headline grabbing 34%, but actually maybe 0.5% is what the difference is. So, you know, I haven't done a deep dive into all of this yet, but that on the headline, there's really not much there that's changed other than what we knew was coming, you know, for this. And just to make that point really, that the super deduction finishes 31st of March. So if you're going to buy anything, buy it now.
Very helpful. Thank you very much, Jan. That's great. Okay, any other comments from anybody on that particular box before I move on to the next box? Yeah, John, and don't forget to come off mute. And you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
That's all right, John, go for it.
I'm probably showing some ignorance here, but as is accountants there, normally you get tax, or you don't have to, sorry, you can use depreciation to offset the charge for new machinery, and you don't get taxed on that, or there are tax allowances. And the way this is phrased now, you can deduct investment in new machinery. Is that on the purchase cost? So you get a saving on that. And then you also get saving because you're putting a depreciation charge in your accounts. So you could have almost a double saving.
No, depreciation is not allowable in your accounts. So they're not letting you double dip. But before, there were certain ways certain things had to be treated, and so you get like an annual investment allowance, or this year we've had the super deduction, and that's where you have to put your capital allowances through your tax return that way, and that's where your tax return starts to look very different from your statutory accounts. This really impacts larger companies where they had a cap on their annual allowance. I think it was £1 million a year, but for most small companies in the New Forest, you're not getting into that point anyway, and therefore the fact that they've removed that effective cap doesn't actually make any difference, because you'd still get your first year allowances anyway, but you can't claim depreciation itself is disallowable. So when you do your tax return, it always comes out, but then often you get a credit back in, which is an annual allowance.
Yeah, okay, that's the latest stuff. Thank you.
Superb. Thank you, Jan. Great. Any other comments or questions or anything that people want to raise on this one before we move to the next box? Okay, so let's move on. So the next one that I picked out here is business and people. So we've got there's been quite a lot of talk about this. So 30 hours of free childcare for working parents in England, expanded to cover 1- and 2-year-olds. However, that is actually going to be happening over a period of time. It's not an immediate thing, because it's recognised that there isn't actually any capacity, or rather they're at capacity in the industry. So there was also then talk about incentive payments to help childminders that want to get started, increasing the amount of children that they can have, so increasing the ratio. So there are quite a few different things in here, but it's going to take a while for some of those to actually come through. So that's going to be an interesting one, I think, for us in the Forest, because there has been a lot of talk about the difficulties in hiring. And clearly some of that hiring difficulty will be coming from parents who are not able to or can't afford even some of the childcare. But the solution to it isn't going to happen overnight. So I think that this one is something that, whilst we may see benefit for our businesses in the Forest, it's not going to happen immediately. And is there anyone on here who's having any direct experience of that in terms of issues with hiring or any other areas where they're seeing impact from this? And also, do we have any? No, we don't have any nursery companies on. Do we have any? Rob, do you know if we've got any nursery companies at all as members of New Forest Business Partnership? You're on mute.
I am on mute, or not on mute now. I was just actually trying to see what's happened to Elaine's subscription. No, I don't know of any nursery businesses in NFBP actually. Okay,
right. No, that's an interesting one.
I used to be the group financial controller for Yellow Dot Nurseries in Hampshire, and this is a bit of a hot subject.
Yeah,
there's going to be a bit of a knock-on effect with the nurseries, because the way they set up their fees to parents is the 1- and 2-year-olds effectively pay a higher level of fee, and that makes up for the loss that they make on the 3-year-olds that are currently funded. So that there's going to be quite a lot of interesting speculation, shall we say, from the current nursery companies, I believe, on this.
Oh, that's very interesting. So effectively the younger ones are overhead recovery.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the 30 hours, it only relates to 38 weeks of the year. It's not 52 weeks of the year.
Right. Okay. So it's not.
So in actual fact, you know, for somebody coming back to work full time, or even part-time, but obviously you're going to work 52 weeks of the year. You're not going to work term time only, which is 38 weeks. You only get funded for 38 weeks.
Wow. Okay, so that's still going to be that's still going to be a shortfall then, isn't it?
Yeah, so it doesn't, although it sounds very good, it's there are pros and cons to it, shall we say.
Okay, so I think what we're going to see there then is a lot of debate probably over the coming weeks and months on this one then, because it's not going to meet the brief then, is it? Okay, that's interesting. The one of the other pieces that was interesting was this piece on families on universal credit who will get that support up front. What that was about, and again, Jessica, you can probably comment on this, is that people have to pay a deposit up front and some of them can't even afford to pay the deposit. So what this was doing was meant to be providing some help towards that deposit up front. And I guess that's something you've probably seen as well, Jessica, that people struggle with finding that money.
Yeah, they do struggle with finding the money. And also the knock-on effect for the nurseries is that the money is actually paid to the individual, to the parents direct. It's not paid to the nursery. So although it's to fund nursery education, it then relies on them paying it over to the nursery, and that doesn't always happen.
Right. Okay. So it's definitely some of the mechanics around this then might be a little bit tricky as well.
Bit clunky.
Okay, so I think the really interesting kind of takeaway point for all of us here, and thank you so much for that, Jessica, because it's really useful to have that insight into the industry, is that as a headline, and for all of us dealing with companies in the forest who do have people on their workforce that would be accessing this kind of childcare, that actually, you know, these solutions are not looking all that perfect yet. So that means that if you're hiring and people are having to sort out their childcare, this could still be could still provide us with a shortfall in labour in the forest.
Yeah, one way to help your employees is actually to do childcare via salary sacrifice.
Right. Okay. Yes,
that's a good way to
point.
help your own employees. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. And again, that's one that Jan, I'm sure you could comment on as well. Oh, mind you, that's no salary sacrifice, so it's not so much for the companies. Then it's more for the individuals in terms of their salary position. Okay. Right. Okay. Interesting one. Then there was also the piece around more support for people returning to the workplace. As we know, there's been a lot to try and encourage the over 50s to return to the workplace. So there was talk of this kind of return as like an apprenticeship, but sort of at the other end of the scale. There wasn't much meat on the bones on that one, to be honest, in terms of what was announced today. It felt like it was a bit more of just a framework piece, but nothing in the way of detail yet. So whether or not that will come with some of the same kind of support that apprenticeships get, I don't know. So that will be an interesting one to watch this space. I'm thinking very much again about some of the issues that we experience around the forest in terms of recruiting people into positions. It will be interesting to see whether or not this brings anything for our businesses as well. Okay, excellent. So let's move on now to the business and the community side. So this was an interesting one. They picked up around high energy costs, particularly for leisure centres, swimming pools, etc. So there's going to be an increased fund for that, which is good. There was a bit of talk about supporting local charities with an additional 100 million. But what was also interesting that it got called out specifically was suicide prevention charities, and extra money for them to help the voluntary work that's going on in this sector. We know this is an area that's been talked about quite a lot lately. So I thought that was really positive to see that piece in there. Other pieces in terms of helping us in the community, I really picked this one out. I thought we'd like this one. That draft products in pubs will have a lower duty. So in other words, that's really trying to encourage people back into the pubs. And I think given the amount of eating and drinking places that we have in the forest and what proportion it is of our local economy, I'm sure everyone will view that as a very positive piece of news. Rob, you've come off mute. I was expecting you to comment.
What, this Rob or t'other Rob?
Oh, well, either Rob.
Yeah, I'll be interested to read about the detail. As a trustee of Lyndhurst Community Centre, we've certainly been hit very hard by the energy price rises. So it'll be good to have a look down at what that means for us in terms of support going forward. Certainly quite worried about the middle of this year when we come off our current fixed price deal.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. No, I think all of that piece is going to be interesting. We know that from a domestic viewpoint that the current coverage is continuing for the next 3 months. I didn't put that in here because that's not so much of a business piece. But yes, in terms of that piece for business, then it will be interesting to see what that does as well. I have popped the fuel one in here because I'm sure we'll all be very relieved that the 5p cut is maintained and the duty has been frozen. So I think that's probably quite a relief for all of us with all the various travelling around that we all have to do. Rob, I know you have involvement in some other charities. Is there anything in there that you will be, able to benefit from, do you think, in terms of some of that support?
Yeah, two things. I kind of missed the budget today, kind of seeing bits and pieces on the news. So with the pubs, are they increasing the duty on any of the spirits or beers or anything? Or
I haven't picked up, so you missed the beginning bit on this, Rob. So I didn't focus so much on some of the what I would call standard domestic stuff that you can kind of pick up off the first page of the BBC.
Yeah.
What I've tried to do is actually, because I sat and listened to the whole thing, or watched the whole thing, is what I've done is try to pick out more things that are specific to the business side. But I think it's pretty much rising. I think it's pretty much in standard as per usual. But anyone can look it up quickly for me. I'd be grateful for that. So we can get a proper answer on that one rather than me trying to remember.
Support for charities. When they say 100 million for local charities, as in support, it was good to hear obviously the suicide prevention part, but what support are they giving to charities? Is that through the councils? Do we know how that support is? Because I'm a chairman of a charity myself, along with Rob,
Yes,
local involvement, and you kind of think, what support are we going to get as a charity?
so additional funding available. So again, I'm not an expert, so I think go in and have a look, but initial as a headline piece, there is an additional 100 million coming in there, so it's worth going in to have a look and see how to access those funds.
Okay. And Rob, to answer to your question reference the commercial energy market, there is support at the moment, but they haven't said they're going to continue that, so it is likely to end soon. So if I hear anything, I'll let you know.
Okay, good, thank you. And then the last one that I'm picking up on here is business and innovation. So some really interesting things in here. The commitment to invest over the next couple of decades on low carbon energy products. And there was particular focus on carbon capture and storage. So this is all about innovation. There were some very interesting innovation pieces around here. So we'll see what that might bring in terms of, jobs and future opportunities. I was particularly interested because of my background on the nuclear piece. So nuclear now being classed as sustainable, with small modular reactors, competition for co-funding. Now, you might think, well, how does that affect us? No, so some of you know I used to work for Rolls-Royce. Rolls-Royce has a business around small modular reactors because they do have a nuclear business, which is primarily around nuclear submarines, but also they have the small modular reactors business. So this is very much about jobs in the UK. So the fact that they're pushing for this and there's going to be government co-funding available, I think is really, really positive. Also, the life sciences and creative sectors tax break. So Jan touched on that earlier as well. So good to see some of that. But as she's rightly pointed out, very much the devil is in the detail. So we'll be interested to see how that works out over a period of time. The other one that's interesting is this reform around the medicine side. So I've also, in my background, worked for Novartis. And so I learned a bit there about how drugs get approved, and we've always had a mutual recognition agreement with other European countries as part of the EU in terms of if a drug is approved in one country, then it's approved across the EU. But of course, post-Brexit, that opens up some different possibilities for us. And what this is talking about now is that mutual recognition piece extending to other countries, because we can kind of do that on our own, if you like. So that then opens up the possibility of getting groundbreaking drugs into the UK much faster, because we won't just do mutual recognition with Europe, we'll do mutual recognition with other countries as well. So that is also good from a manufacturing viewpoint in the future, because if you've got that product approved for the UK, then potentially you can go for production as well. So again, that's something else that that gives an opportunity within the economy as well. So that's an interesting one. And then there was talk about further funding for groundbreaking AI, artificial intelligence R&D, which of course the tech sector in the UK is expanding exponentially. So to have the opportunity for more R&D in this area, I think is very interesting. So some real interesting pieces in there. As I said at the outset, I've raced through this at a whistle-stop speed and tried to pick out the key pieces that I think are of interest to us. If you look on the BBC, it's kind of much more focused on the sort of the domestic side, if you like, but I'm sure there'll be plenty of analysis in all of the various business newspapers over the coming days and weeks. But I think as a 2 hours out, this gives a bit of an interesting snapshot really around the kind of things that we're seeing there and what the direct impact is for us in the New Forest, but also onwards from there in terms of where it might bring challenges. And the childcare one is a really good example of that. So picking up on some of the issues that we know businesses are experiencing around hiring, does that make it easier for people to join or rejoin the workforce? Well, we can see and we can hear from Jessica's input as well, is that some of these things are not as straightforward as they might appear. So, we might say it's a good start, but actually there's still some issues with that down the line. So I'll pause there for a second and open it up to the floor. So I'd be really interested to get any initial thoughts or comments, or particularly where people want to add to what's already come into here in terms of bringing that extra information and insight.
Justine, can I just ask something?
Please do, yeah.
What do you think is in here that, unless it's completely unrelated, that has caused so much distress to the stock market today? Because it's well down on the back of what, on the face of it, would be a relatively forward-thinking budget, I would have thought.
Yes, I haven't followed the effect on the stock market today because I've been rather frantically writing this. So,
sure.
Can I maybe pop in there? I think I know the reason.
It's 250 points down.
Really helpful.
Yeah, it's actually nothing to do with the budget. It's actually another one of the banks, a Swiss bank, that's in an awful lot of trouble, and that's what the stock market don't like. So it's unbudget related. Unfortunately, there's another Swiss bank that looks like they're in an awful lot of financial trouble, and that's what's made everyone nervous.
So in that case, then there might be a bounce back tomorrow on the basis of the budget, perhaps, if it's well received.
Unlikely, because this bank will cause an awful lot of problems if it goes under.
Well, that's Credit Suisse, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, is it? Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, their shares are 23% down, apparently.
But it's made the whole of the stock market nervous. I looked at that this morning. On a positive note, Justine, in our industry, we were very pleased to see that the business asset disposal relief hasn't been looked at. So that means that anyone wanting to close their company down can make use of the 10% tax rate. And it's still £1 million that people can take out at that rate. So that's some positive news for our industry.
Oh, that is good. Yes, excellent. Good spot. Excellent. Okay, great. Good discussion. And what else would people like to put into this one, or anything else that they've spotted?
A couple of little bits, Justine, if I may. Thank you very much
Please.
for sitting through a budget. It's fun, isn't it? Watching budget announcements come up and trying to figure it all out. It's really difficult to pick bits and just put it all into presentation like this so quickly. So I think you've done such a great job of just trying to distill it down into these major points. I think the pothole fund is useful, because I think many people in the New Forest, the roads aren't great. I often see things where people have had really bad damage to their cars and wheels and and all sorts of things. So I think that would be useful if I'm not sure how much 200 million is going to, how many potholes that fills, but
or how deep.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. half of every hole. What do you think? But I think it's definitely helpful. And I think if there's a recognition there that they understand, if they don't invest in things like the roads and infrastructure like that, that causes a major problem, doesn't it? But I think one of the really good things is the pension allowance being changed. So they've lifted that cap on the lifetime allowance, and that is really, really good news for our NHS staff. So there's lots of consultants I know I talk to when I'm looking at people's tax returns, and people are saying I might as well just not work because it's costing me more money to go to work and do this shift because I'm losing out on my pension with taper relief. I've got a cap on how much I can put in, and all of these things. So in actual fact, that will actually enable lots of people to take on more work that we really need people to be doing, like in places like the NHS. So I think that's a really good thing. And the other thing, I was being a bit mean earlier, sort of saying about the corporation tax isn't really particularly helpful, which it's not. However, what is helpful is they've increased the amount that individuals can put into their pension pot from 40,000 a year to 60,000 a year. So if a company does have surplus cash, surplus profits, and it's able to put that amount into their pension, then that's tax deductible for the company, and also the individuals getting tax relief that way. So it's kind of a bit of a stealth tax relief in that sense. But that's probably the other little highlights I would just chuck into the bowl. And just on the stock market, I'm sure everyone's aware that it really got rattled with the Silicon Valley Bank. That's really what it's done. Obviously, if Credit Suisse finding themselves in a perilous situation, that's bound to cause some serious wobbles, because obviously they're just absolutely huge. But it's interesting what's happening there with HSBC buying the other bank. And I know there's a lot of tech startups that are very nervous about their money and what they're going to get out. And I know there's been a lot of protection been brought in to try and protect that money, but somewhere along the line, someone's going to pay for that bank. That's what's going to happen, isn't it? So that's me. Thank you.
Yep, no, really good points raised. Thanks very much. And I hadn't popped in the personal piece around the pension piece, but I appreciate the link across into the company piece. So that's good. Interestingly, on the BBC, after they'd run the initial budget piece and they have then people in to comment, there was a lot of fuss about the pension thing, about it being mainly for the more wealthy. But what they didn't pick up, and you rightly have, Jan, is actually the importance of it bringing people back into the NHS, for example, at the more senior level, where, as you've said, they've said it's just not worth their while working. And I think we'll see that on a lot of the commentary, that people have kind of missed the point as to what that actually is helping to achieve.
It is, however, only effective from April 2024. So before we go out and party too much, we've got another year to wait.
Yes. Time to save up, ready for the next block.
Maybe that's what they're thinking.
Yes,
I will be very interested to see what the view of the green lobbies are, having regard to the reclassification of nuclear as sustainable. I imagine that there could be a piece around that in due course. Tomorrow, for one.
Unenthusiastic, I think, is the answer to that one.
I suspect that's right. It's a clever piece of management, though, I have to say.
Well, and I think it's got some justification behind it. I mean, I could be getting controversial here, particularly as I'm a director of a renewable energy company myself. But nevertheless, I think nuclear, and frankly, I think oil as well, has got a future in a mixed economy. I think we've got to look at all energy resources with the right source being used for the right instance. See you, Elaine.
So, I mean, France has had a very strong nuclear sector for years, hasn't it? And it has caused some interesting issues around knowledge retention as well, because I know a couple of people who were big in the nuclear industry when it was kind of on the first round of going, and of course they've long since retired. So some of that expertise has dropped out of the industry. So that provides a bit of a challenge around knowledge retention as well.
Looking at the budget today, Justine, it was interesting to see a lot of it is all focused on new technology, isn't it? Nuclear.
Very much so. That came through very strongly. Yes, absolutely.
Quantum computers and
quantum computing age and all that.
And obviously get people back into the workforce with regards to if you're over 50. And I think it's a very positive budget, but I would like to have seen more for the lower income earners as well. But I suppose you can't have everything. But I thought it was very forward thinking, because if we don't start thinking about technology, AI and all those sort of things, we're going to be left behind, and other countries are going to excel, aren't they?
And actually, they are. And actually, Rob, you pick up on a very interesting point. So, if you go to look at the sort of standard news networks, they're not picking up on the detail of that, which is why it was actually really worth sitting through it. And I literally kind of transcribed as I went and then picked bits out later on. So I did it that way. And it was actually really interesting because there was a huge focus around new technologies and around that very aspirational piece of trying to position the UK to be that kind of home of that, if you like, for the next few years. So that came through very, very strongly. And that piece around those small modular reactors, again, is all part of that nuclear strategy. So I thought that was very interesting, the AI and the quantum piece, and also building some enormous computer facility thing. I can't quite remember the detail of that bit now, but there was a whole piece around that as well. So I think what that is going to bring, that's going to, as a challenge, which is going to be very interesting, is going to be around making sure that we don't have a skills gap. Because that was the first thing that occurred to me when I heard that, because it's great to have all those technologies, but you've got to grow the people who understand them at the same time. So that's going to be an interesting challenge, I think, for education as well.
Yeah, and you know, you kind of, you know, I think the UK have been renowned for a service industry, financial services. Now we're going to go more technical, more innovative. So I think it's exciting. Obviously, 5 to 10 years from now, we can look back and go, yeah, we did it right. I think it's the right choice. And there'll always be services that hopefully in the New Forest we can accommodate and help and support. Hopefully, I saw something about Pinewood Studios, film industry or something, you know, they put more money relief into that. So maybe they could come to the New Forest and film our businesses.
Well, I think there is actually already a website you can go onto called New Forest Film, and you can register that. Yeah, so if people aren't aware of it, you can register to then see where they're filming in the forest.
I don't think they want my office in their movies. I don't.
You know what, actually you can have, you know, they're often looking for home locations as well for people with different types of kitchens, offices, everything. And there's a database you can just register yourself on. You know, they really are looking for all of those sorts of things. They were filming what's it called, Unforgotten one. They filmed that in Leamington High Street a while back, outside the Angel, Blue Pig. Been filming in Winchester for the Crown the last few weeks. So, you know, there's always places they're looking for. Even if you've got a really fantastic avocado green bathroom, you know, they want that because many people haven't got those anymore, and they're trying to do, you know, kind of a retro piece. So it's well worth having a look, putting whatever you've got on the database. You never know, you can make a little bit of money.
And they do pay well. I've actually had it done many years ago when I was a child. They came and used our house for filming for a like a 1 hour sort of, I think it was ITV Playhouse, if anyone remembers back that far. And that was quite an experience as a child, watching all of this as your house got taken over and cameras everywhere and lighting rigs in your living room and stuff. It was really quite incredible. So yes, well worth doing. But yeah, it's interesting around that piece around the creative side. And you're right, there's been a massive expansion at Pinewood. And of course, then that again brings in, you know, more work and more skills as well. So interesting to see where further that kind of expands in our direction.
Do you think, Justine, then in the New Forest, is it, I mean, the New Forest is very much, I would say, I'll put my neck on the line here, very much hospitality, the New Forest area, isn't it? Hospitality. Do you think there's any leverage in the New Forest looking towards more of the innovative technology side of things?
I think the businesses in the New Forest, it's not just about the hospitality. That's the very much the piece you see out front. But actually, we did a survey of our members a while ago, and we found that actually there's a large amount of service companies within the forest, and professionals particularly. So, and funny enough, we've got a really good representation and example of that today. So we've got numerous accountancy firms in the forest. We've got numerous legal firms within the forest. We've got 2 represented today. And we've also got a lot of marketing companies in the forest as well. So again, Tanya, a good example of that. So we've actually got a lot of professional services organisations. And in terms of the rest, Jan, I know you've got an interesting cross section of clients as well, haven't you? Particularly in terms of the creative sectors.
Yeah. I mean, quite a lot of those are based sort of London way, with the sort of visual effects, post-production companies, theatre companies, but then I also look after a lot of local ones as well, particularly theatre ones. And then obviously, look, we've got a lot of not-for-profits as well, of course, you know, where people are providing services like Age Concern, New Forest, or you know, it's interesting that they've got this additional money for suicide prevention charity, because I look after one of those as well, and their work is absolutely phenomenal what they do, and they specialise particularly in the construction industry, where it's got a terrible suicide rate actually in that. So that I'm sure they will be really welcoming that announcement today. But also we mustn't forget our Solent Freeport. You know, that
yes, I was wondering about that. They didn't
Yeah.
really. They talked about some new enterprise zones, and they
Yes.
named them. They were mostly further north, but they didn't mention about the free ports. But of course, that's a big one for us.
And I think it's really, it does feel like it's a little bit of a sleeping giant in terms of what local businesses realise that, you know, they might benefit from that. Because actually, if people bring in, it's like film, if you bring anything in, if you stimulate the economy in any way, and you create jobs and you create infrastructure, and they're going to have to put roads in and housing and different things like that, then actually it stimulates all of those hospitality businesses, because people go out and eat and drink and, you know, and all of those. It's a no-brainer really. But I think it's interesting to watch and see that. And so you do get little tax breaks if you're situated in those areas as well. And what's really good about the Solent one is the fact that they've allowed it to be broken up into smaller sections, whereas I think or the other ones, they haven't allowed that. But because they couldn't get a particular piece of land mass to fulfill the brief, the Maritime UK did a fantastic job of persuading them to allow them to use these other different patches. So it's actually spread out quite a way around the forest as well, and, you know, across Southampton, which is really good.
Can I say something?
Go for it, John.
Okay. There are a lot of engineering companies and construction companies around here. You see in Lymington, and you've got Cobham Aerospace up in Christchurch. And what also interested me coming down here, you've got Burton down in Lymington that makes all the lifeboats for the Royal National Lifeboat Institute around the whole of the country. So these companies seem to be a little bit hidden, because I think everybody seems to be bogged down trying to get as much production out of the companies with less labour and more automation, and they have their heads down. So you don't meet too many of these people on the networking circuits, because they're linked into aerospace and other bigger companies, so they're already getting their turnover. I don't know if that comment is useful, but
yeah, I think it is useful, John. And it reflects what we found in the maritime sector event that NFBP had about 6 weeks ago, where there were quite a few marine sector businesses at that meeting who were based either in the Lymington area like Burton, or down the waterside, and of course a few in Southampton, more than a few in Southampton. There's a bit of a specialisation in some reasonably high-tech composites going on in this part of the country. But actually also in the broader technical sector, we do have a smallish nucleus of higher tech businesses, and I think often they are because the inventors of particular bits of IP have actually moved to this part of the country for lifestyle reasons, and they've taken the business and some of their workforce with them, or they're working remotely. So there are a few companies making things like very, very high precision cameras and bits and pieces for Formula One vehicles, specialist components for Formula One. There's a few niche areas of technology around the forest as well.
yeah.
I think I opened up a can of worms there, just saying with hospitality.
Maybe
that's just me just enjoying the hospitality of the New Forest.
Yeah, but I'm glad you did, Rob, because I've now heard about a few different companies around the forest and a few different industries around the forest that I had not appreciated were here. I knew some of those, but I didn't know some of those more high-tech ones. So that's really interesting, isn't it? Because it shows. So I'm glad you asked that question. Don't feel bad.
Going in the opposite direction, low tech.
Yes.
And back to your the point about there being a reduction in draft beer duty, that actually has to be good news, because I don't know whether it's just good fortune, but we do seem to be blessed in New Forest with quite a lot of microbreweries.
Yes, that's a very good point. You're absolutely right.
Are going to benefit hugely from that. Although, interestingly enough, only if they can get their beer into pubs, because bottled beer is going up. The duty on that is increasing, as is your glass of wine. 11%, I read at lunchtime.
Oh, God.
According to the report in The Sun, ever reliable, of course. But
you were standing in a queue at the time, were you?
No, but joking aside, that is a significant thing. So there needs to be those involved in the industry that actually take draft beer in, perhaps hoteliers and so on and so forth, really need to be worked on to get the local brewers, so far as they can, where the businesses aren't tied, of course, involved, because it's going to only enhance the area and make those businesses more profitable.
Yes,
many
and I assume that
micro-businesses, of course,
that's
work
not
on
just beer, though, is it? That's not just beer. I mean, there's actually a draft. There's in Sway, where I am, and you are as well, David. There's the cider place as well.
Yes, interesting. I didn't read what it said about that. I don't know whether cider's covered by the same thing.
Not sure,
No.
but yeah, if they have it on draft, it might be.
Logic would suggest that it ought.
I thought it was just L's, David and Justine. I thought it was just L, real L. That's what I read.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Shame.
But you are right. We've got a lot of microbreweries in the forest, so that could be potentially a fantastic opportunity for them if they can make the most of it.
The cider people just need to change their name and call it cider ale.
Real cider L.
Snake bite. Those who remember that from teenage years.
Couldn't possibly comment on that one.
Did they say, I know the corporation tax is going to go up. Did they say it's going to come down further on down the line? Did they mention that?
Oh, not sure. Jan, that's one for you.
No.
No, I didn't see any respite from that.
Okay, all right. Okay.
No, I wish. But
Can I pay my corporation tax now for the next 5 years? Like, let's get it on at 19% or something.
It's called payment on account, isn't it?
But you could pay money on account and you get a better interest rate than you get if you've got it in your bank. So you can pay your corporation tax early, and actually they will pay you a decent savings rate, interestingly. But no, unfortunately, you can't pay at that rate.
Do they? I didn't know that.
Tax,
oh yeah. Pardon?
Is that the same with personal tax as well?
Yeah. If you've got credit sitting on your account and it's before your due date of when you have to pay it, you actually build up interest.
Ah, okay. Because I always get a statement saying this is what you owe. By the time we get a statement that says, and this is the interest because you haven't paid it yet. I'm like, oh,
yeah, that's going the other way. But if you pay it early, they'll pay you interest for it.
Okay.
But then of course you then have to declare the interest income in your accounts. And but it's still sometimes it's better than what you're getting in a sort of business bank account where there's not really much interest going in it. So if you've got it there, if you've got it sitting there and you're not using it, you can pay it on. And also sometimes people worry about kind of tying the cash up by doing that. But actually, if it's sitting on there and it's not due yet, you can ask for a refund of it. So it's not sort of there forevermore. Yeah. Once you've gone past your date it's due, you can't get it back.
I'm guessing it might take 6 months to get it though.
Yeah, I think the hardest thing at the moment, I just read the other day, I buy with our charity, we bank with Barclays in Limpton. I hear that's closing down, and it's suddenly like, where do you bank nowadays? The banks are just disappearing. From a business point of view, a lot of our transactions are automated, but that we still need to have access to cash, on predominantly coins, and suddenly our local Barclays is going. And when you look at others that offer free banking, they don't have a high street branch. That's the hardest thing I think now for businesses.
It just means a longer queue at the post office, because basically the post office is the bank for just about everybody now. Yeah. That's what's happening there. So it's unfortunate really, I think, but particularly for charities, it's very difficult to get bank accounts open, and CAF Bank is not very good. It's a bit of a challenge, I think, for a lot of charities actually to sort of get a decent banking service. And like you say, when they go for high street, it's really hard.
Yeah, I think Metro and Starling seem to be the two main good competitors for charity accounts, as far as I can see.
Really?
I don't think they do not for profit.
I think actually, Rod, that's changed, because they've been the go-to bank for trustee accounts.
Yeah.
And I made an inquiry yesterday, and they've now stopped taking any new business at all because they've been inundated. There's no one else that does them, in effect.
Right. Because I researched it about 2 months ago, and it's obviously changed since then.
I think you might be out of luck now.
Wow. Well,
maybe reopening.
Well, if anyone knows of any good charitable banks, not the Bank of Dave, but any other banks,
Okay, so we're 16:59, so we have a minute to go. So thank you very much